Welcome back to the Enough Club. I am Bryan Nicol,
Pieter Villiers.
and today we're going to finish off our series about trusts. The last episode in this series is not really going to be all that much about trusts, to be honest. It's going to be about alternatives for high earners in South Africa who think maybe they need trusts, but maybe you've listened to a few of these episodes and decided a trust isn't for me, but I still have some problems I want to solve. Maybe I want to make sure that should I pass away, the money goes to my family as quickly as possible. Maybe I want to get around executors' fees. I want to look after my children if something happens to me. Maybe you don't need a trust, and there are some alternatives to trusts. And so we're going to unpack that today. But firstly, I want to mention that it's quite possible with some decent estate planning, you can save a lot more money by changing one line in a will than you can by investing for 10 years in the world index. What I mean by that is we recently did a wealth audit for a family. And in this once-off financial planning experience, we found with their will wording, the wording of their will said that everything goes to the trust. If I pass away, everything goes to the trust. If my spouse passes away, and that makes sense. So you want to be able to fund the trust with capital. They have a family trust already, so it's not about should I open one or not. It exists. It has money in it. But what we realized was, estate duty is basically donations tax. And so upon death, you donate this money to the trust. Do you need to donate it to the trust yet upon death? Or can you maybe utilize some of the allowances available to South African citizens and taxpayers that can mitigate this, that can reduce the amount of tax you pay? So in a nutshell, what we did was we changed the wording of the will. We made full use of the 3.5 million rand abatement, the allowance everybody has for estate duties. In other words, the first 3.5 million rand of your estate does not attract any estate duty. We also made use of the fact that if you leave things to your spouse, you leave any money to them, any assets, whatever the case may be, it's kind of like just keeping it. There's no tax consequence, no estate duty, nothing like that. So it's by just changing one or two lines of a will, we were able to save this family close to 6 million rand. We saw that as clear as day when going through their will, and it was literally a 5-minute conversation and a note to the lawyers, please amend. And so this is how you don't necessarily need the most hectic interventions to be able to make meaningful differences in your life. And secondly, it just shows how valuable proper estate planning is. And it doesn't need to be too complex. You just need to know what you need to know. And if you don't know what you don't know, then you need to speak to people who do. So firstly, I want to talk about some of the alternatives to trusts. And for this, I'm going to need the help of my little friend, Pieter. So Pieter, please start us off with your top alternative to a trust and what problem it solves.
So I think main reason why people want to move assets to a trust is because they're scared of taxes. So our biggest tax that we're probably going to pay when we were to one day pass away is estate duty. So that means that all the assets that are estate dutiable, that's most things. It's like property, it's share portfolios, it's money in the bank, it's a tax-free savings account, it's an endowment. All of that will be liable to estate duty. And I mentioned that the first 3.5 million is estate duty free, and the rest gets taxed at 20% up to 30 million, and then 25% above that. But there are some assets that actually falls outside of your estate that is never going to be hit by this tax. And that is where retirement funds comes in. Retirement annuities, pension funds, provident funds, preservation funds. They will not be hit by estate duty. And with any type of investment vehicle, there's always trade-offs. There also are some rules around how that can be invested, a little bit more conservative than what you might get in your offshore portfolio. But that estate planning benefit of a retirement fund is massive. And it's not something you'll see when you're young, when you start out your retirement journey, retirement planning. But once you get to your 40s, 50s, 60s, and you've got a big chunk of wealth built up, then it's very difficult to fix that. But if you've started building a tax-efficient and estate-efficient investment portfolio that has different types of vehicles working together with different benefits, then we start playing in the big leagues. Then we start doing proper financial planning, proper estate planning. So retirement funds is a big one. It doesn't fall within your estate. It's not estate dutiable. What you mentioned was if you nominate your spouse in your will, that's a massive saving. That's almost like one of the the life hacks of estate planning is if you nominate your spouse, and spouse does not necessarily mean you have to be married under our normal law. It could mean there's different definitions of a spouse. It does include many types of permanent life relationships and different types of engagements. But essentially what that means is if you nominate your spouse to receive assets, it will become a deduction in your estate. They call it a Section 4Q deduction. So everything goes to the spouse. Not only does that then not become liable to estate duty, but if it's like a property or share portfolio, there's also no capital gains tax. Because if you die, what happens is it's as if you were to sell everything. There's a deemed disposal, they call it, which means that if you made a profit on something, you pay capital gains tax. But if you nominate your spouse and they inherit that property or that share portfolio, that's seen as a rollover. So there's no capital gains taxes. That's another big saving. And that's why when you are married or you have a partner, that's a very important thing to consider, because you already could potentially save hundreds of thousands, even millions, by just nominating them. Now, yes, true, when they one day pass away, they will be liable for those types of taxes, but you defer it. So it's already like a strategy to follow. Some of the assets that you own will not be liable to estate duty. We call it like personal use assets, things like your cars and stuff in the house, household contents. So even in your will, you can nominate your children to receive that. If you've got a nice laptop or PlayStation, then you can nominate them, or you can say let's say 3.5 million goes to my family trust because that's the abatement. My personal effects goes to my 2 children. So that's everything that I own basically in the house. If I turn the house upside down and shake it, everything that drops, and the rest goes to my spouse. Because then essentially you're paying zero estate duty. Then just by using that strategy, you're already saving potential millions of rands. So that's the one thing. And also, I think the second cost that people are concerned about is executor's fees. So the executor is the person that when you pass away, they need to now go and finalize your estate. So they need to make sure all the taxes is paid, all debt is paid off, make sure that everyone receives what is due to them, all the heirs, all the legatees, all the beneficiaries, and they get paid for their service. It's quite a tough job to have. It's a lot of admin, it's a lot of work. And everything that the executor touches, they'll have their percentage fees. And it usually goes up to about 4% inclusive of tax. Now, there are some structures. Obviously, if you move something to a trust, the executor won't have to touch that because it's the trust, it's not yours, it's not your estate. But there are some other structures that you can keep in your personal name. Again, retirement funds, they do not attract executors. If you use endowments, which is like also a type of investment vehicle, and you nominate someone, and that could again be your spouse, it could also be the trust or another family member, that beneficiary already will receive that money. So it's a quick way to transfer wealth without the executor having to manage that. And it also doesn't get frozen up in the estate. So that's also a nice way of transferring wealth to the next generation or to your spouse. Living annuities, which is now once you retire and you convert your retirement fund, your pension fund or retirement annuity to a living annuity, there you can also nominate a beneficiary and they can inherit that portfolio. So also again, saving executors' fees and potentially not having that being tied up in the trust. So retirement funds, endowments, they can become very strong and powerful estate planning tools that is much less complex of having to go through the whole system of creating a family trust. And for many high income earners that doesn't yet necessarily have a lot of assets built up, talking now tens of millions of assets, these tools will be enough. And then you keep life simple and you get very close to the actual outcome that you wanted to get to. And then maybe the last one I can think of is donations tax. So also again, donations tax is almost like a estate duty. It's just whilst you're alive. But you have that 100,000 Rand per year that you can donate to someone else tax-free. You can donate as much as you want to your spouse. Again, spouse is a hack. There's no donations tax payable. But if you donate outside of that, you can do so 100,000 Rand per year. So between the two of you, you've got 200,000 that you can donate. So if you have a large estate that becomes estate dutiable, what you can do is, like, let's say you're older and you're not going to spend all this money, you can start donating 200,000 Rand per year to your children or your grandchildren whilst you are alive, then you're also decreasing your estate size, which means that if you one day pass away, the estate duty that you'll pay will also be less, and also the executor's fees. So again, see how we use these types of benefits that a trust can provide, just in your personal name, still getting a similar outcome without having to go through the complexity. So those are the main things that I can think of. But Bryan, maybe fill me in where what else you can what comes to mind.
Yeah, no problem. Just quickly about donating in life as opposed to bequeathing in death. So, in other words, people get their inheritance in life. I think they call it giving with a warm hand. So, instead of waiting until you're dead to give your grandchildren or your children your assets, your capital, or whatever you've got in your estate, you can actually give it in life. So you can see it being enjoyed. We have clients that do that, or no, rather, we have clients who are receiving that from their parents. It's for their children. So every year they do 200,000 as a couple. They give it across, and it goes to the children's investment portfolios. All the paperwork is done. It's declared in their tax returns. And so you might think, okay, well, that's going to take forever, 100,000 Rand each per child. But you look after 10 years, that's those two kids, for example, if it's two kids, they have in total 2 million without growth, just in the donation that's been given to them. And then after another 10 years, it's 4 million just in terms of donations. That's without growth. So now each child has 2 million and they're 20 years old. And the parents, on the growth of their investments that they've got, their pensions or whatever the case may be, their retirement funds, they've been able to withdraw, they have excess cash, and they're able to pay that across to the grandchildren. So that's a nice way of, like you said, reducing the size of your estate in life without having to set up a trust that will cost you 20,000 Rand a year to run. That might lead to some confusion, if you don't want complexity in your life and you don't necessarily want to have to understand all of these ins and outs. So yeah, that's a great point. It's something I think a lot of us forget, especially as advisors, to remind our clients about. Something else that comes up often is people wanting, especially, we've currently going through a situation where we've got about five clients who are actively going through divorces. So we've been appointed by these clients as they're going through the divorce now, because it's a major transition. They want to be on top of their finances. And now they don't know what their estate will look like at the end of the divorce. So there's a lot of change. They want us there. Now, one of the things they say is, I am now a single mother or a single father. It's mostly a single mother that's come to us. And so now they say, fine, I've got a child or I've got two children. I need to set up a trust for them, obviously, because I don't want the money to go to my ex should I pass away. And our previous wills mention that. So I must go to my children, but they're young, they're under 18. Now, the common thinking that I've found, the common thought is that you do need to open a trust now and keep it open with nothing in, but just keep it open. And then should you pass away, you tell everybody in your will that everything must go into this trust you set up for your children. So you have to pay 20,000 Rand a year or whatever just to keep this thing open. That's not the case. So there is something called a testamentary trust. So a testamentary trust, if you think of a last will and testament, it is in your will that you're right that a trust will be set up for your children when they, if they are minors and you pass away, and that all of your estate must go to the children via the trust. However, if you pass away and the kids are now old enough, they're older than 18, a trust will not be set up automatically because it says if my children are minors and I pass away. So now that takes care of that problem for you. The executor will come, look at the will and say, oh, I'm going to set up a trust. Everything's going to the trust. They set the trust up, and then the assets, the life policies or whatever, it all pays into the trust. So that is a way of, instead of going ahead and approaching a company and say, I need to open a trust, and they will probably say, okay, cool, and they'll open one for you and you pay 20,000 Rand a year, and then your kids are 18 and then you close it and you've just spent a heck of a lot of money on nothing. You now know you don't necessarily need that. So giving to your children, if you're a single parent, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the form of a trust. It can be in the will that makes provision for a trust. So that's the one thing. Another thing I want to mention is the fact that One of the downsides of a trust is that it cannot hold offshore assets. So if you have a trust, it's a local South African trust, and you've got, say, 10 million rand invested in Luxembourg, through an investment platform or whatever the case may be, brokerage account, and it's there and it's in ETFs. You can't put that in your trust because it is now offshore. It needs to be a South African-based investment. So with a trust, you can invest offshore, but through feeder funds. So you invest locally through the investment company you're using, and then they will take the money offshore and invest it into a US or a US dollar or a euro or pounds version of the fund. But it will be in South Africa. It will be reflected in rands. And so you can't get that you can't hedge and put the money all abroad. That doesn't work. You need an offshore trust for that, which is something we'll get to in another different episode. So now, firstly, you might think, okay, well, fine, I need to start this trust and I want to keep my assets in it, but now the assets are abroad. So you might not necessarily need a trust for that purpose, because you're wanting to ring fence the money and make sure it goes to your children or your family should you pass away. Earlier on, you talked about the endowment. So now a nice little hack that maybe a lot of people don't know is that if you do have this 10 million abroad in ETFs and you now want to make sure it goes to your family or whatever, you can, in your will, create a testamentary trust, provide for a testamentary trust. Or if you do have a South African trust already, you don't need to bring the money back to South Africa, put it in the trust and then send it right back, pay all the capital gains tax, pay all of the fees of everyone involved in that value chain. What you can do is keep it in an endowment and make the trust the beneficiary. Because you see, the nice thing is that a South African trust can inherit offshore assets. You see, it can inherit offshore assets. It can't create them. So what will happen is that money can pay out from an endowment offshore, and then it pays into an offshore bank account or whatever, or it might remain in the ETFs or in the shares. So now the trust has this investment portfolio. So it has money that it can withdraw from if needs be. So that, in your lifetime, you might not be able to see the money in a trust, but you can make sure it gets there for the next generation. So once again, that's something to be mindful of, because I have heard of people who have liquidated all of their offshore holdings and investments, brought them to their South African bank accounts, put them inside a trust, and then sent it right back abroad again. It's not necessary. It's a lot of admin. And I don't know if everyone involved will tell you that, because there's a lot of money to be collected along the way. And unfortunately, incentive drives behavior. Another thing is that you might say, I've got children and I've got some wealth. I'm a high earner. I'm building up $1 million or $2 million every year. It's just building up nicely in my portfolios. And I want to start putting it into a trust. I want my children to have this money, when I pass away and my spouse pass away. That's great. But your children right now might live in South Africa because they're your children and they are minors and they're going to school. And they have to do what you tell them and live where you tell them to. Fast forward 15 years, Johnny's got his MBA or whatever, and now he's working in Europe. And Jane is now working in the East, for example. Now, if all of your assets you have slowly but surely, painfully and expensively moved into a trust, and you pass away and the money's all there, and your spouse passes away and the money's still there, one of two things has to happen. The trust should either be wound up and all of the money comes out, and it's a massive tax event, and it's a lot of admin, and it takes a while, and then it goes to your children wherever they are in the world. Or forever and a day, the children will always have to, if they need the money from the trust, they need to withdraw from it, pays into a South African bank account. They pay the tax in South Africa, so they always have to make sure that the double taxation agreement is in effect wherever they are in the world with South Africa. There's always going to be additional costs there and admin. And then they need to take that money abroad as regularly, as often as they need it. There's Forex charges there and banking fees and everything else. So once again, you create 2 to 3 to 4 different admin steps and cost price points along this value chain, because the thought of having a trust was nice. But these days, as we know, many South African professionals seek work abroad and might never return. And so for them to have money in rands, growing in rands compared to where they are in the world, it might not be beneficial it might not be in their best interest if rather all of that money was in a nice tax and estate planning efficient product. And then upon passing, it went directly to them. And they could take that money with them abroad and then immediately invest it in that new domicile. So that's just one or two things that I have seen in my experience where people want to trust, but maybe if you talk through it and think through it and consider the alternatives, there are some alternatives that are much less costly, less of a headache that you can consider without making life more complicated than it needs to be.
Exactly. It's always understanding, when we make any decision, we need to understand what are we after? What is the outcome that we are looking for? And if the outcome could be achieved with something that's more cost effective, less of an admin, less of a thing that's going to keep you up awake at night, we always default to simple plan, simple life. If you can keep things simple and you follow a evidence-based investment strategy that we know is going to beat 95% of other managers, and you make the best use of the different types of vehicles that you have at your disposal, each one having their own purposes and their own pros and cons, but not just focusing on one and saying, yeah, but I'm only going to do this. Collectively, they all fit together in the puzzle of your financial plan. And then all right, well, I'm leveraging all the benefits that's available to me. But before we can do that, we always go back to, what is money meant to do for you? And that is why sometimes when you ask a question, you will get the technical answer. Like sometimes it might mean, okay, well, the tax would be the long-term, the most tax and cost-efficient vehicle. But it may not lead to the best quality of type of lifestyle that you want to live, especially like you explained, if you have family dynamics where kids might go overseas and never come back, then it changes the picture completely. And you won't maybe know that when your kids are younger, but it's these things that you just need to think about and kind of just need to brainstorm before you make such a big commitment like opening a trust, because it is an expensive exercise. From our side, we don't have a specific view or preference. For us, it's always understanding what it is meant to do for you, considering all the options, fleshing them out, running scenarios, seeing which one best serves you, and then helping you make that informed decision. And that just starts with having the foundational knowledge of all of these different entities. And the more complex the structure, the more difficult the jargon to understand, the more complicated the industry seems to make it want to be, because again, if there's incentive to sell something, it's easy to make it very complicated so that no one asks too many questions, and then you just trust me. Why? Because I told you. That's nonsense. Spending time understanding these types of structures is important. It's always your money, it's your life. So having a collective understanding of everything, then making sure that you put together a strategy that works for you, both in a tax and cost and estate friendly way. But just note that there's not always just one way to do something. And unfortunately, with the internet and social media, that sells. If you have one view and that's the only thing that works, and everyone else that believes differently is an idiot. It's not like that. There are different ways to skin the cat, proverbially.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is just show you the pros and cons, give you a balanced overview, and hopefully by the end of the series, you would know which strategy might fit your picture the best, and build from there onwards upwards.
Yes, I agree. And with estate planning, it is so fundamentally important. I can assure you now, you cannot invest or save your way out of a bad estate plan.
Yeah.
So you need to do it properly. You need to take your time. You need to think it through, and you need to partner with good people to help you come up with something that works for you, your circumstances, and your family. So don't rush into this trust stuff, regardless of what you see on TikTok or wherever. It might work for some. It's really not there for most anymore. And so get the opinions you need. Read what you need to, watch the series a few times over if you need to as well. And feel free to leave a comment or two or a question or two in the comments about what you've learned about this. Maybe it's helped you change your perception about trusts. Maybe it's helped you realize you've entered into something that you maybe need to get out of. Either way, as I've said in previous episodes, share what you have learned. Everyone else can learn from it as well. So on that note, I thank you. I thank Pieter for his involvement. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe and tell your friends about us. So far, we have 5 regular listeners. If you exclude my parents, we have 3. And so the more, the merrier. And until next time, from my side, keep well.
Well, see you in the next one. Cheers.